You remember that nerdy kid, the one in middle school who spent a lot of time on the internet and dressed up in weird costumes? And sure, all that time on the internet and computers netted me a good job, but it wasn't my passion. That passion? Photography. And it turns out that photography was something that was already in my blood. So if you like cameras, film, chemistry, history, adventure, and a little bit of exploration, then I think we're going to get along just fine. Hey there friends, welcome back to the channel. I've been developing my own film at home regularly since 2012, and I can really thank the folks at Photostock, my friend Julie Douglas, to encourage me to pursue having a certain level of control over my black and white images. Developing at home is not for everyone, and you definitely don't need to do it to get enjoyment out of your film photography, but for me it is something that is a vital part of my own personal process. And when it comes to developing at home, there have been a lot of tools that have come into my possession, and probably one of the best devices that I've ever had was something that allowed some level of automation to the process in the form of having a rotating base. Now, rotating bases are nothing new in photography. There are a ton of options out there, but there has been one that has stuck through my photography and has definitely made my life a lot easier and made it a lot faster and more economical to develop my film, and that is the Bees processor. Now, I have written on this subject before on my blog. You'll find my original blog post in the description below, but I figure I should talk to you a little bit about it because I've been using it for a couple of years now, and seeing it on YouTube might inspire more people to invest in something along these lines because there are a lot more options out there now. So let's get into the Bees processor. So I have used a rotating base for my film processing really since I got into 4x5 film. And I used an old Besler or Unicolor print drum to process my sheets of 4x5 film. And in cases of that, it was a single speed, a single option, and you know what? It worked. But the thing is I never actually adjusted any of the developing times that I found online. And then my good friend Matt Betchberger of Ravenny Labs loaned me the Aura processor, and I loved it. It was an absolutely fantastic way to have some level of control over and automation of my film development, and I really liked the results I got out of it. The problem was, at the time, the Aura film processor was not being manufactured on a wide-scale basis. And as much as I wanted to say to Matt, like, hey, look, can I buy this off of you? A little part of me went, no, you really don't need it. Hand agitation is fine. And the trouble is that I use a wide variety of film developers, and a lot of them have long developing times. And if you're hand agitating, you really have to pay close attention. And when you're doing 3-4 rolls in a developing session, you really want to sort of cut down the time so you're not developing late into the night, rattling around in the kitchen, having lights on, having water running. It's not really conducive to a small space where I live and develop my film in. And when I posted that, someone pointed me at the Bees processor. And yeah, the features were a lot less than what the Aura processor had, but you know what? It was a good price tag for what it did, and it worked better with the Patterson tank system I had than the Aura processor did. In fact, the Bees processor is dedicated to work with a Patterson tank, and even you could put a Jobo tank onto this rotating base also and get really good results and not have to invest in a complete Jobo system. The one thing the Bees processor doesn't do is have any level of automation. Like, there was no timer built in, there was no ability to adjust the rotation speed or anything like that. But frankly, that didn't really bother me because that wasn't something I was looking for. Now, if you want a level of automation, the Jobo system is honestly the only way to go, including the ability to keep the chemistry in the tank and the chemistry in your bottles at a proper temperature, have timers, and all this stuff if you're trying to run a small scale film developing lab or a large scale of home developing. But if you're like me and do relatively moderate number of rolls of film in a month, then the Bees processor is definitely the way to go. And even today, if you are a Patterson user and want a certain level of automation and fine granular control, you have the AGO system that has recently been released. And I'll talk a little bit on that later. But for me, the Bees processor is the perfect blend of a moderate level of control and the ability to work with existing systems. So let's take a closer look at what the Bees processor is, the functionality, and how it generally works. Okay, so this is the Bees processor itself. As you can see, the exterior of the system is printed using 3D printed technology and is a hybrid form of both 3D printed plastic along with a little bit of rubberization and plenty of metal, especially on the internal motors. The central processing unit for the device is an Arduino Nano microcomputer, and it's amazing what devices like the Raspberry Pi and the Arduinos can actually do these days in being able to do a mass production, relatively affordable means of automating a lot of things. As you can see, the device itself is fairly simple. You have right up here at the front, this contains a USB port where you can actually go and update the firmware. I haven't seen any firmware updates yet. I'm sure they exist and I just haven't bothered to update it yet. But this actually is working pretty well in how I first got it. You have your two primary control units here. You got your 3-position switch. This controls the different modes for the processor, and you have a simple on-off. You have your main driver units here from the central motor to the actual wheels that rotate the tank, and then you have the secondary rollers here. Now, one thing that is interesting to note is that these secondary rollers can be replaced, and they have wobble wheels here, which I have never used these wobble wheels. These are still directly on here. I have never actually used them, but apparently it does help with smaller tanks. And yeah, I honestly have just stuck with the standard rotation wheels instead of going with the wobbles, mostly because I use both a 235mm and a 335mm tank, and it seems to work best with those, and I honestly haven't gotten results that I dislike from it. One of the best things is that it is powered by a standard power adapter, which is provided. So the power adapter has a standard North American plug on here, and it's a 12 volt 1 amp output, just a standard barrel plug here that plugs right in. And if you develop anywhere in your house, the one nice thing is that there is usually always a standard plug. And the best part is that you can take a look at this and find something that works within your local region. And then right here on the top, you have a sensor indicator light and a sensor area. Now, this is what helps control the auto reverse feature that is available in all modes. And you actually have to attach a magnetic sensor to your tank. And the best part is that the attachment is non-destructive, which means you can actually remove this sensor. So this is what the sensor looks like, and it is simply another 3D printed piece of flexible plastic that has two magnets attached. These all come, when you buy the kit, you actually get two of these, which is great because I have two tanks. And you get a couple of these broad rubber bands to help with the attachment. And it takes a little bit of time to get these positioned just right on the tank itself, but they relatively will stay in place. And especially on this smaller tank that I have, I like to position one just up here on this small lip, and that keeps the one roller in place, and then the sensor here, and then the tank really doesn't move. It's when you get into the larger tanks that you have to add a second set of rubber bands to sort of keep it in place so it doesn't sort of get out of alignment with these sensors. The second thing that comes with the kit are two of these. These are, for a better term, these are penguins. They kind of look like a decapitated penguin in the long run. And these fit right here in your center column. And the reason these are needed is because without these, the column tends to spin freely when the tank itself is rotated. And when you position the tank in a horizontal manner, these would spin as the tank rotates. This little device here prevents that from happening, so that when you are rotating the tank, your spool, your center spine stays in place so that the film remains constantly in contact with the chemistry inside the tank. All right, so once you have the chemistry loaded into the tank and so once you have the film loaded onto the reels and into the tank using the dark bait, and you've added the chemistry, you can start using the bees processor for developing. Now, I mentioned earlier that there are 3 modes. So the first one is called pulsed rotation. Now, this equivalent to what a standard hand agitation is. And even though the documentation says to reduce the developing time from the listed time by 5%, I found that that actually underdevelops your film, and it's best to just go with what the time is. And you set the position to 1 and you flip it on. And it's a little difficult to see here, but you can see that it is sort of going in short spurts, and then it will start to reverse and then slow down in the middle of things. This is great for developing only, I've found, within my experience. And it is best to use about 500 milliliters of chemistry in this place, so that chemistry is almost always in contact with the film. Now, you can go and reduce the amount of chemistry by half so doing something like 250, but then you really want to cut back the developing time because of your vertical alignment, the horizontal alignment of your tank. The second option here, you flip up to number 2, is constant slow rotation. This rotates at about 10 RPM. And again, the documentation says to reduce the development time by 15%. In my own personal experience, I found that it is best to cut it only by 10% for a majority of the chemistry. And this will constantly rotate the chemistry, the chemistry inside the tank, so it is constantly in contact. Again, you'll want to increase the development time if you are doing it only halfway full, but I found that 500 milliliters works really, really well in this case, and then it will reverse every so often. And again, the position of this magnetic sensor is key to helping that. I find this works really well for developing for long periods of time. I usually set it in this mode for development cycles that are 10 minutes or longer, and then I cut it down by 10% from that listed time. And I always use this mode when I am working with fixer. I find that I can fix most T or delta grain films completely in about 6 minutes, and traditional cubic grain film in 5, and get superb results. The third and final mode is number 3, and that is about 38 RPM. This is a mode that you definitely don't want to use the wobble wheels for, and I really only use this for the stop bath. Either I'm using an acid stop bath or a water stop bath, and I usually only let this go for a single minute, and as you can see, it still does the same reverse. And that's really how I use it. It is actually really, really great, and I found that I can seriously cut down the amount of time I spend, and I don't really have to pay too close attention to the developing, and it honestly makes my life a lot easier, especially when working with films that say, oh hey, here are the Jobo times. I can usually take those and apply them here at the number 2, and they tend to work. The only thing is that again, you don't have that same granular control as you do with both Jobo and Aura and AGO, but this works for my workflow and I get the results I want, so that honestly is the most important part. Now, for the longest time, I've only used my smaller 235 millimeter reel tank with my Bees processor. And thanks to my friend Gaten Cormier, apologies for the pronunciation, I am clearly an Anglophone, not a Francophone. He inspired me to actually revisit using my larger 3-reel tank, and it works just as well, especially when I am processing a lot of film at the same time using the same chemistry. When it comes to chemistry, I've actually found that using either the pulsed or the slow constant rotation mode does very little in the way to diminish certain qualities. I've not seen an increase in contrast or an increase in visible grain on any film I've developed using almost every developer that is standard to my kit. And that includes even development cycles that are shorter than 5 minutes. I mean, I've done a 3.5 minute developing time and a 4.5 development time using the pulsed mode, and have gotten superb results out of it using Bellini Hydrofin with the 1:15 dilution. But if you take a look at my Flickr stream, since I got the Bees processor, almost every single roll film that I have developed has been done in some way on the bees processor. And I want to share a few of my more recent and honestly favorite shots that I have gotten with, that I've developed using the bees processor now. Now, as I said before, I've used a lot of different developers, both stock, strong and weak developers, more dilute development formulas with the bees processor, but there are a few that really do stand out both in film stocks and chemistry that work well. Number one is D96. This is a motion picture developer, and it tends to work far better than hand agitating on a automated processor base, mostly because a lot of motion picture film is developed in bulk using automated machines. So films like Ferrania P30 and Eastman XX in Kodak D96 work really, really well. And you don't just have to limit yourself to homebrew D96, you got the Cinestill and the Flick film versions and the FPP versions that are readily and commercially available for you to purchase, plus the just sheer availability of Eastman XX as a viable still picture stock. You can get some absolutely fabulous results out of the combination of D96 and Eastman XX using the bees processor, and honestly any sort of automated or rotating base processor that you have available to you. The second developer that really works well in this is Zone Imaging's 510 Pyro. I have seen no problems with that combination using the bees processor, and I've actually worked closely with my friend James Lane to come up with a few times for films like Orwo, UN54 or NP100 with a constant slow rotation. That being said, there are a couple of things that you really shouldn't use the bees processor for, and the first thing that comes to mind is a diaphine process. Diaphine really does depend on hand agitation and controlling how often you agitate the tank. I honestly haven't experimented with it. I really should, to see how it does. I might actually do that sooner rather than later. So definitely stay tuned for that. Yeah, that's about it. The one thing you should take note of if you are doing color processing, I do not recommend using Patterson tanks unless you have a throwaway lid that you can drill a small hole into in the center of the lid to off-gas it when doing the Blix processing. But the way around that is to get a dedicated Jobo tank that can do that, because it has a built-in vent system to off-gas, especially when using the Blix. All right, so that about covers it for this video. Let me know in the comments, what is your preferred method for developing film? Are you someone who just, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna send it to a lab and let them do everything for me. I don't have the time or the patience to do it myself. Or do you prefer to do it at home? What do you use to automate your processing method? Are you someone who uses a Jobo? Do you use an AGO? Do you use an old Besler or Unicolor rotating drum? Or are you a fellow bees processor user? I honestly haven't found many people online who admit to using it, so I'd love to hear from people who use the bees processor. How do you fill up your tank? Do you do a full amount or do you do half the amount? What's your adjustment for developing times? I would love to connect with you. And this year, I want to hear your questions for me. So if you have a burning question about me, my personal life, my photography, my tastes, my cameras, leave that in the comments and use the hashtag AskALP. And as always, if you have a topic that you would like me to cover in either a video or short, leave that as well. If you are new to the channel, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell notification icons. New videos are released every Wednesday through 2025, both long form and short content. And consider hitting that bell notification icon so you know when I release new comments. And if at anything, leave me a thumbs up, or if you just don't like what I produce, give me a thumbs down. Honestly, I don't care. So until next time, my friends, shoot what you love, with what you love, on what you love. Don't stop.